Oh, yeah, another good news.
Hello, my fellow friends and Mapsterians. Glad to have you. That voice that you heard initially that died off, tried to trail off because that was Amber. She doesn't like to be acknowledged on World Wide Web, but I just did it. She came running in from her job, and I'm so thankful that she's here. And anyhow, so we are in the map room, the map couch room. I said map room. We are in the map couch room. We recently just got us a router over here. As most of you know, we got fiber optics now at MAP, so thankful for the advances that are being had. And anyhow, we don't want to go over there into the dining hall because my mom and dad's apartment's right off the dining hall, and this coronavirus thing is intensifying, and so we're trying to stay out of there. And so I said to myself, Self, why don't we go over and invade Amber space? And so here we are in the middle of Amber space because right behind me, you see this right here, this television? Right on the other side of the wall, that's her apartment. You might even hear Taz as he barks here in just a moment because Tad loved me. He loves me. All right. Anyhow, we are in the book of 1 Corinthians, and I am so thankful that you have joined for this evening's time as we study this particular topic. I am going to actually spend some time going over again what we went over last time, because most of you know I tried to do it at home, lousy internet because we had too many people on and all that kind of stuff, and so it ended up being broke up into 3 different segments. I lost most of you halfway through that, so we're just going to stay with this, hopefully, internet signal that will keep us consistent, but we need to review. I also broke my remote just before we went live, and so I've got to use my finger over here now to hit the button. All right, here we go, guys. He says, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. This obviously is indicating that he wrote to them at another time. This is 1 Corinthians, right? Well, then when did he write? Well, this is, I guess, First Corinthians. No, it'd be, what would that be? Corinthians, just Corinthians, and then 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, right? Anyhow, I don't know. That was a bad joke. It didn't work. But what I'm saying is, evidently there was a letter that was written to these folks prior to 1 Corinthians. Now, that's not a big revelation, I don't guess, because obviously there was a lot of folks who wrote a lot of things back in the day. This was a primary way for them to get the information out, etc., etc. And so there's a lot of writings, I suspect, even that the apostles wrote, that we do not have. For whatever reason, God decided that he is going to canonize from here and into the second, meaning he's going to make sure that those get into the scriptures that we have preserved for us. We know that the Lord did many things that were not recorded in our Bible, and they weren't written down. So we don't have a record of those kind of things. In fact, what was it? It says that the world could not contain it if we had all the information about Jesus and what he did. And so obviously there's a lot of stuff, but this points to an important point. I had my tongue wrapped around something back there. I couldn't get it out. An important point, and that is when we study the subject of authority on Sunday nights, we're needing to reference how do we get our Bible. And one of the things that happened with regards to getting our Bible is that in the process of all this stuff being written down by humans, some of it was inspired by God. And so that's the stuff that's going to get in our Bible. Some of it was not inspired by God. That's the stuff that's not going to get in our Bibles. And by the way, evidently, some of the stuff, even that was written by people who were inspired to write other stuff, some of the previous stuff, such as this one, whatever the letter was prior to getting 1 Corinthians to them, that God said, oh, we're not going to put that in the canon or in the grouping of scriptures. And so we don't have that record. There's Debbie down there in Louisiana, and there's Laura. Boy, it's good to see you. I've been enjoying watching your daughter. Laura's daughter's been doing all kinds of craft stuff, and I've really enjoyed watching her. So anyhow, make sure you look into Laura McZig's daughter as she does her stuff. But here we're back into 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 9. So he says, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. That makes sense. We shouldn't, be running around with individuals who are doing bad stuff. That just makes sense. But he goes on to say, not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral, or the greedy, or the swindlers, or the idolaters. In that case, you'd have to leave this world. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because it sounds like he is saying to us, well, then it's okay for you to run around with bad people if they're the bad people of the world. You just can't run around with bad people in the church. And that's not at all what he's saying. In fact, later on, we probably won't get to this context yet, But as we enter into chapter 6, he is going to actually make the statement that you and I will one day judge the world. And so, yes, we can judge the world. Yes, we can make judgments about whether or not to have those kind of friends or not have those kind of friends, because he's going to tell us later on that's eventually what's going to happen anyhow. In this passage, what he's referring to here when he said, I wrote my letter not to associate not at all many people of the world, is he's talking about his emphasis. The emphasis that he is placing here is within the church. And so within the church, because, and that makes sense, does it not? We have more control over family than we do those who are outside the family. Gabriel's right over here reclining in the love seat. You can't see him, but he's over here, and I've used his illustration too much, and he hates it when I talk about him, but I'm going to anyhow. Remember the illustration of what's your name? Gabriel. I'm going to call him Judah. That's the grandchild. Gabriel over here, when he was growing up, every once in a while, he just wouldn't get with the program. And so we had to put him in somewhat of an isolation scenario. And we put him in his little bedroom, and we'd sit him on his bed, and we'd say, no, son, you're going to stay here until you can act nice. And so there he'd sit in his little bedroom by himself, and we go out, and a lot of times, I just now am revealing this to Gabriel, but a lot of times we acted like we were having a big time in the living room when it wasn't really that big a deal. But we wanted to make sure he got the point that it's fun to be part of the family. It's not fun to be separated from the family, okay? And so it wouldn't be long until he'd start, Mama, can I come out? Mama would go in, kiss him on the cheek, comfort him, and say, okay, here's the deal. If you can act like the rest of the family, then you can come back and be a part of the family. Well, that's an illustration of the control, if you will, that we have within the family realm, because he's my child. I could do that to him. But I can't do that to the neighbor's child. I can't walk into their house and put their child in isolation and say, okay, you sit on your bed. That's their child. But Gabriel's my child. He's part of our family. And there's certain standards, or there's an etiquette, even if you want to call it that, within our home. Well, God has etiquette. God has standards as well. And so Paul is not saying that it's okay to associate with sexually immoral people, greedy, swindlers, idolaters, and all that. He's not saying, yeah, just go for it. It's okay. As long as they're part of the world, it's not a problem. You can have as much relationship with them as you want. He's not saying that at all. What he is saying is, in the home, we have more control over the situation. So when you can control it, control it. And that's what we're supposed to do. Laura says, poor Gabriel. Yeah, I pick on him a lot. But anyhow, all right, so Paul is dealing here with the emphasis of the church. Know that, okay? That's why he's saying this stuff. He's not trying to eliminate the judgment that we should make with regards to what friends we should have, those kind of things. As far as the world is concerned, yes, we need to stay away from worldly people who are sexually immoral, who are greedy, or swindlers, who are idolaters. Yeah, we need to stay away from those folks. But my emphasis in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul says, is about the church, because that's where we have the major amount of accountability that's going on is within our family. All right, then you get down to verse 11. But now I am writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or a sister, but is sexually immoral, greedy, idolater, slanderer, drunkard, swindler. Do not even eat with such people. And so you see the emphasis here. He's saying, again, it's not that he's licensing the idea of associating with bad people in the world. He's just saying that's not my topic right now. That's not my emphasis, because we don't have as much control over that. But when it comes down to family stuff, we can, because we should be having accountability to a greater measure within the family. Now let's pick verse 11 apart. I know we did this a little bit last week, but let's see it again. He said, now I'm writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister who is sexually immoral. Notice that the list gets a little longer when he gets down here. Up here he includes the sexually immoral, the greedy, the swindlers, and the idolaters. When you get down here, you got sexually immoral, the greedy, the idolaters, the slanderers, the drunkards. Swindlers was up there as well. And then he gives us this point. Do not even eat with such people. Now, again, I think this is a reference to family time. One of the things that I'm really hopeful with regards to this COVID-19 that's happening in our world right now is that it is bringing families together. It's forcing them to spend time together. And they're having to work out conversation times. They're having to actually sit at the dining room table and eat rather than, run around town getting, all. And it's causing families to become family again. This is a big, big moment for us. And I'm hopeful that if we will embrace it, that we're going to come out the other side in a much more holy fashion. But as he comes down here to this, he said, do not even eat with such people. He's obviously talking about something that would be common within the family. Go back to Acts chapter 2, and it's pretty clear that at the end of Acts chapter 2, what did you do? She broke, Amber's back there, she broke the couch. Did I mention Amber again? She's back there. She's pulling on it. Anyhow, Amber, you're going to have to fix it on your own. I got a class to teach. And so what we're in Acts chapter 2, you might recall that one of the things that he says in Acts 2 is that they continued daily to meet in each other's homes. And they broke bread, they ate together with each other, that kind of a thing. And so clearly the eating together is a big deal. And he's saying, all right, I'm talking about the family. Don't associate with bad folks who are in the family. They need to be separated out. Now remember, this entire context seems to be a continuance of that discussion of the guy who's living with his stepmother and doing stuff he shouldn't be with his stepmom, okay? And so he's saying you need to separate yourself from that. You guys have gotten to a point where you're actually celebrating this kind of stuff. And he says, don't do that. He's part of the family. And I realize you might not be able to control people outside the family, but if they're inside the family, then we have accountability and we need to control that. And so don't even eat with such people. They need to be separated away so that they will come into conformity with family standards. All right, Amber, now that you got your couch put up and she had to put her foot thing up, what do you call it? Do you have a comment? Any comments? Gabriel? Cindy? Anybody out there that's got a comment that needs to? Got some of our mapsters having to watch this from afar because of the COVID, whatever it's called. But anyhow, no comments? All right, let's move on to the next. How do I do this? Oh, yeah, I got to hit the bar. There we go. And then he capitalizes on that context by saying, what business is it mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God would judge those outside. Expel the wicked person from among you. And again, that wicked person is probably in reference to the guy who's living with his mother-in-law. Okay? Not his mother-in-law. What would that be? His stepmom. Low recording has stopped. Oh, no. How did that happen? I must have too much stuff on here, Cindy. I need to get some off of here. So coming back to we need to expel that wicked person. Laura's going to say, poor Gabriel. I'm not making a direct parallel here, Gabriel. But essentially what we did with Gabriel is we expelled him from the family scenarios so that he would miss the family scenarios. Okay? And so that's what he's saying. You need to expel this guy. Put this wicked person out, because he was doing stuff a lot more horrible than what Gabriel ever did. Okay? You need to separate him, because that's where accountability comes. As a family, we have that opportunity to separate ourselves from those. You can't separate yourself from the world fully. And he says that in the previous context. If you did that, you couldn't live. Okay? But when it comes to family, you can make certain separations. And through that, you can draw somebody back. But before you get to this idea of expel, notice what he says up here. What business of mine to judge those outside the church? It's almost like he's saying, you and I don't have any business judging people outside the church. And I know a lot of liberal preachers who are taking that position right now, and it just simply ain't so. Because in the very next context, in chapter 6, as you open this thing up, he's actually going to say that we are destined to judge the world. And so it's not that he's saying we can't judge the world, or it's none of our business completely to judge the world. What he is saying is, in this particular context, the real pressure, the accountability factor, is within the home, not within us judging the world. So what business of mine? Are you not to judge those inside? This is kind of one of those, what do you call those questions? Rhetorical. It's supposed to answer itself. Yes, you're just supposed to judge those on the inside. Members of the family inside are supposed to fall under the accountability of the family. And so, yes, we are to judge one another. We are to look at each other, and we're to ask, how you doing? And one of the struggles that I've been having recently is, it seems to me that some folks are just kind of getting a pass with regards to gossip, getting a pass. So I know some congregations that are giving a pass to individuals who are living together just because they happen to be the children of somebody who's powerful within that particular congregation. On and on you can go with it. So it's like they get a pass. They shouldn't. That kind of stuff you might expect from the world, but you cannot expect it or allow it to exist within the church. They need to be called out about that. There needs to be an accountability factor. So yes, we are to judge those who are inside the church. God's going to judge those on the outside. We're going to see that. Obviously, eventually, we'll get more to that. There's Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Thank you for joining me this evening. All right, next slide. If any of you has a dispute with another, Do you dare take it to before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the Lord's people? Now we're transitioning into chapter 6, and we'll get to that part that I was talking about earlier. But don't divorce chapter 6, verse 1 from chapter 5 and verse 13. It's just a flow. Remember, in the original manuscripts, there is no chapter breaks. In fact, there's not even sentence breaks. And so it's just kind of one flowing text that goes through here. Now, men came along later and they said it would be easier for us to move around in the Bible and to tell people where we're at if we had verse breaks, if we had chapter breaks. And so I'm thankful that we have these, but they're not inspired. And so as you end chapter 5 and verse 13 and go into chapter 6 and verse 1, remember, in the inspired record, this is just a continuous flow of information. And so he's saying, God will judge those on the outside. Expel the wicked person from among you. So we're in a position now where we need to take and we need to cast judgment on a person, pass judgment on a person, I should say, and we need to act, do something about it. Then he's going to say, in that same vein, so you got a dispute with another? Well, why would that have come up in the thought process of Paul? Because he's just been talking about this guy who needs to be expelled from the family so that he'll correct his ways and come back. And so within that kind of general context then, he enters into chapter 6 and verse 1, and he says, okay, so there could be some disputes among you. Now he's expanding it to other things, but this is where the subject began with this guy who needs to be expelled, okay? Disfellowshipped is often the way we put Matthew chapter 18. Read that passage. It talks about the process of going through expelling somebody or disfellowshipping a person. You got a problem with your brother, you're supposed to go to your brother. If he doesn't listen to you, then you take 2 or 3 witnesses so that the 2 or 3 witnesses can establish that this isn't just kind of, a moment of manipulating the facts. You're actually getting the truth from one brother who's saying to the other brother, you got a problem, you need to change, and the other brother is in refusal. He says, I'm not going to do it. And so you've gone by yourself. You've taken 2 or 3 witnesses. Then he says you take it to the church, take it to the whole body of people. And you say, this guy, this is what happened, and he will not correct it. The church is then supposed to go to him and try to help work the situation so that he'll come back. If he won't even listen to the church, church is the whole family. If he won't listen to the family, then he is to be disfellowshipped, which means he is to be pushed to the outside for the purpose, always remember this, for the purpose of drawing him back. The reason we expel or disfellowship is so that they'll come back, they'll repent. That's why Paul is going to say you need to turn this guy over to the devil. He's not saying that we just give up on him and hope that he goes to hell. He's saying that you turn him over to the world or the devil's control so that he will miss what happens within the home and he'll want to come back. So you got a dispute with a brother or a sister. How are you supposed to deal with that? Well, you just take him to court, right? Not according to this passage. He says, do you dare to take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the Lord's people? In other words, he's saying that as family, we ought to be able to deal with family stuff from the inside rather than taking it to the world, airing our dirty laundry, as it were. And I think that the point that is made pretty clear here is that you and I, being that we are of God and therefore think on a higher level, we ought to be individuals then who can pass better judgment, even in the minor materialistic worldly things, than taking it to those who are dominated by materialism. There's Cindy Patton down there. Pattons are watching. Good. How are you healing up, Cindy? Are you doing any better? I hope that you are. Laura says, Gabriel, you can come live with us. They'd like for you to do something live.
Come live with us.
Do what?
Come live with us.
No. Who would do all the chores around the house? Laura, no. I got to keep them down here. Somebody got to mow the yard. Okay. All right. Moving back into the text then. All right. So judgment instead of before the Lord's people. Or do you not know, watch this, or do you not know that the Lord's people will judge the world? Hold it. I thought he just got done saying in the previous chapter that we don't judge the world. Well, again, you could say that this is future tense, but I think by very nature, and other passages would prove this, by the very nature of your life, your example, the light that you shine, you pass judgment on the world present tense today. And I think that you are called upon to pass judgment upon the world, as we've said earlier, with regards to, evil companions corrupt good morals. Well, how can I decide who are evil companions if I don't judge them? This whole idea that we're not to judge each other just simply isn't biblical. We are not to judge without enough information. That's biblical. That's condemned of God. But we are called to use our mind to make judgments of each other. That's certainly within the home, the family, the church, okay? He says we're going to judge the world. And so the point that he's making here is, okay, if you're going to one day have the power to judge the world, then why in the world can't you take care of some of these minor areas as far as taking your brother or sister to court, lawsuits, etc.? Thank you, Laura. She said the church needs this. All right. Or do you not know that the Lord's people will judge the world? And if you are to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? The disputes between brothers in the church? I would hope so. You could judge these things. Do you not know that we will judge angels? Second thing that I thought was amazing about this. Number one, we are destined to judge the world. Number two, we are destined to judge angels. Now, I don't know. A lot of folks have written on subjects like this, and we could go off on this tangent and spend a whole lot of time dealing with it. But I think that one of the things that helps us to appreciate this passage is, number one, understand what the word angel means. Angel generally is a messenger of God, an angelic. He's somebody who delivers the message that God has spoken. Okay, angel just basically means messenger, and so he's a messenger of God, generally speaking. It also, however, is a term that's used in reference to those who once were in service to God, but fell and left service to God, and therefore have become fallen angels. Is it possible that he's saying that in the days to come we will judge the fallen angels? I think that's likely. You might recall last semester we ended our discussion in the book of Hebrews, which is a marvelous, marvelous book. Did the same thing with a verse-by-verse kind of a study. But you might recall that in that passage it talks about how that Jesus, I should say first of all, Jesus was made a little lower than the angels. But then he's exalted now to a place where he now has all authority. It's not that he ever lost his divinity. He lost his glory, part of his glory, in becoming human. Okay, Jesus has always been God, always will be God. But he lost part of his glory in becoming human. And so he was even, it seems that at one point, subservient somewhat to the angelic realm. But now that's no longer the case. Well, I would connect those two texts, that one and this one, to suggest that in the days to come, in the eternity that is to be after this, that angels will serve us rather than we serve them. The reason that's important is because we need to remember, this whole cherub and whatever, when a little baby dies, we give them wings and suggest that they're flying around heaven as an angel. That's not biblical, all right? And I know it kind of gives us hope and all that kind of thing, but to be biblically true, what we need to know is that they actually go to a place, it seems, that's exalted beyond that level of an angel. They are being served by the angels because we are the children of God. We are the ones created in his image. And one day we're going to go into his presence. It's going to be crazy cool because we're the kids being called home. All right, so are we able, are we not competent then to judge the trivial cases? What are the trivial cases? Anything that has to do with this world. Anything that has to do with materialism, selfishness of this realm, this world that's going to burn anyhow. He's saying things that are of a fleshly nature. Surely you guys have got enough brains to be able to deal with this without taking it to the world to have them deal with it. There's a lot I can say about this. I've seen this tear the church up. Because of egos, individuals who just had an inflated ego, and they would not allow the church to deal with this particular subject, and so they forced another brother and went off to court and dealt with that and drug the church through the mud because they had an inflated ego. We need to be very, very careful that we don't violate this one. I might say, but before I leave that subject, one thing I will say, sometimes you are forced into this. There are times that you don't have a choice, that you are drug into it. And I don't believe that you are necessarily condemned for defending yourself if called to a worldly trial by a brother who didn't have enough control over his ego to put it aside and allow the church to decide that. So there are moments when you might be called into this. Verse 3, do you not know that we will judge angels? I thought that was huge. How much more the things of this life is the kind of the punctuation mark here. You and I need to make sure that we deal with this stuff on the internal. The church ought to have enough savvy to be able to deal with this kind of material inside without dragging the whole church through the mud. All right, let's pause there and ask, has anybody got a comment on that one while I get a drink? Amber, anything? Honey, you got anything that you need to say? No thoughts? She's another one. She doesn't like it when I call her out in the public. Nothing?
You probably said this, but in verse 1 when it says dispute with another, could you replace that with a brother?
I think in context you can. And the reason I say that is because we know, like I was saying, the end of chapter 5, we were dealing with a brother. That's the setup for this. Okay, but that's an excellent point. It doesn't really designate necessarily as just somebody inside the church. I guess the problem is if you took this outside the church, you got a brother, and he's in a lawsuit against somebody outside the church. That person outside the church doesn't have any accountability to the church, and so you don't have any real ability to work that out. Yeah, I think this has to be inside the church. That's a good insight. That's the word I'm looking for. Anybody else?
I was thinking that, well, it doesn't really have to do with what you're talking about anymore. I was thinking about the idea of judging the world and all that. I think part of the point of that passage is that, if you have a brother or a sister that they have some issue with some kind of a sin, that you're supposed to call them on that sin. Whereas, the world, if you meet somebody and they're living in sin, it's not your job to tell them that they're living in sin. It's your job to get them to Jesus. And then eventually, once you do that, and once they are part of the family, then it's your job to call them on their sin.
And another thing I was thinking about as you were saying that is that the person in the world probably doesn't even identify it as a sin. They may just think that, this is the way it's supposed to be, and so it's kind of like the subject of homosexuality, which the church has compromised on way too much. There's a lot of us who have decided that, that this just isn't something we need to deal with inside the church. And that's that's very unfortunate. But if you're dealing with another brother and he's got a problem with homosexuality, that's one thing. If you're dealing with somebody in the world who's got a problem with homosexuality, they don't even believe it's a sin. What do I have to offer? Because they have not established their value system in God. Good point. Anybody else? Amber, you got that eyeball like, oh, I'm thinking hard. Anybody else out there? All right, I'm going to move on then. Therefore, what does the word therefore mean, Gabriel? If you come to a word like therefore, it clearly is indicating what?
Saying because of whatever I just said.
Good. So because of what I just got done saying, we can make this conclusion. Therefore, if you have disputes about such matters, do you ask for a ruling from those whose way of life is scorned in the church? I say this to shame you. Is it possible that there is nobody among you wise enough to judge a dispute between believers? So that would identify, love, what you were asking earlier. Is it possible that you don't have anybody that's got enough brains in the church? And we're the ones who are supposed to have elevated our rationale to a higher level because we have the Holy Spirit working within us, not denying the power of God. We should have a higher level of ability to deal with stuff like this. He said, is it possible that there's nobody among you who's wise enough to judge a dispute between believers? Really? I think is what he's saying here. That first part bothered me. Therefore, if you have disputes about such matters, do you ask for a ruling from those whose way of life is scorned in the church? Okay, so are you going to ask for a ruling of those who are outside the church? Now, let me get myself in trouble again, but, it is what it is. This is a lot like the public school system. We take ourselves into a holy scenario. We want to train our children so that they will be holy people, that they'll be separate, part of the church, ecclesia, called out. And then we send them for the majority of their waking hours each day off into the world for the world to train them. Of course, the excuse is, but we only are letting the world train them in things that are of the world. And my thoughts are, well, if that's the case, then why in the world are we losing 70% plus of our kids to the world? It's because the world is always in conflict with the church. And unless we get back to understanding that everything in the world, even secular things, have something to do with faith and God and his control over things, we are putting our children, especially in a position where they can be led astray easily, and many of them, the majority of them are. All right. But instead, one brother takes another to court, and this in front of unbelievers. Why in the world would you rely on unbelievers to make a judgment call with regards to this? May I be more poignant? Why in the world would you rely on unbelievers to teach your children how to get through life when you know that it's going to undermine a lot that has to do with God and his values? All right, Cindy Montgomery says something there. Sometimes if you bring someone to church who not yet learns, often others look down on them. This makes it so hard to keep learning. Yeah, that's a good point, Cindy. Because there's a great difference between the two, isn't it? It's a whole lot different. If I'm preaching to the church, I can layer down. Now, it gets me in trouble all the time, but I can layer down because you have already made a commitment. You have committed to Jesus. You said that you were going to die to yourself so that you can rise to walk in a new life that is dominated by the Lordship of Christ. So you made that commitment. And so that means you are accountable. And I can preach with all kinds of fervor. But if I'm speaking evangelistically to somebody who has not yet adopted the value systems of Jesus, I've got to be careful. Because I've got to first establish the authority before I can ever ask them to be accountable to the authority. That's why Romans chapter 1 is so very important, where it says that man is without excuse, because all you got to do is look at nature and you can see that there has to be a God, because look at all the stuff that's happening in nature. And so it causes us to begin the journey drawn towards the value system of Jesus. But most of us in the world are not yet committed to the value system of Jesus. Only those who are inside the family are committed. And so when you're talking about judgment within the family, you can come down pretty hard on it, and I have. But when you're talking about judgment outside the family, you first have got to establish some kind of level of authority. Good point, Cindy. Thank you for sharing that with me. Any other comments on any of this? All right, let's do one more paragraph at least. No, it's a long one. The very fact that you have lawsuits among you means that you have been completely defeated already. Pause right there. As I was studying this a couple nights ago and in preparation for this class, I was thinking to myself, wow, that's a pretty definitive statement. And it's a little bit disturbing, is it not? And that is the very fact that you have lawsuits among you, the very fact that you are taking, in context, you are taking your problems to the world to have them satisfy it because you're not committed enough to the accountability within the home, within the family, the church. He says the very fact that you're there says you're defeated already. Because you are looking to you're looking to the world to cast judgment, place judgment on things that are of God. How can that possibly be? Again, you're looking to the world to train your child how to be an effective citizen of America, of the world, etc. How can that be? Give them the training that is of God. Why not, he says, rather be wronged? I think in context he's saying, why not rather be wronged than drag the church through the mud by depending upon worldly wisdom, which is kind of a contradiction of terms, worldly wisdom to solve our problems. Why not rather be cheated, he says. It'd be better if you just let the issue, I'm going to lose a lot of money. I'm going to lose a lot of property. I'm going to lose a lot of whatever it is. But it would be better for you to be cheated or wronged than to bring this reproach upon the church. And so I think that by implication, you could also suggest that if the church is going to let a brother be wronged, if the church is going to let a brother be cheated, there's some lack of wisdom within that congregation. Because that congregation, again, is called to have such a mindset that they are able to deal with this better than the secular courts could deal with it. And so when he says it'd be better to be wronged or cheated, I hope that he is using that as an illustration of something that wouldn't happen because we love each other within the church. We've got accountability and we've got enough brains to be able to deal with this kind of stuff. Instead, you yourselves cheat and do wrong And you do this to your brothers and sisters. That shows you the opposite side. He says, instead, what's happening is we don't treat our brothers and sisters correctly. We gossip about them, we slander them, we go behind their backs, etc., etc. And because of that, he says, I think by implication, these folks need to be called out. They need to be disciplined by the church. Just as I and Cindy and Bryson had to discipline Gabriel at times and call him out and put him in his little bedroom and have him sit by himself until he missed being part of the family, some of us need to be doing that within our church families as well. But you know why we don't do it? Because the intimacy is not there. Another reason why I'm really excited about this home church movement that's afoot largely by God forcing it upon us by letting Satan bring the coronavirus down upon the world, but it's going to cause us to be much more intimate. And because instead of worshiping in groups of hundreds, we're going to be worshiping in groups of 10, 15 people. And that intimacy is going to allow a greater level of intensity with regards to accountability. And that's going to make this job easier, as it were, for us to be able to watch each other, to know each other. But when you've got a congregation of 75, 100 people made up by, 20 different families, etc., you've got cliques, you got power families, you got families who slip in and just kind of sit in the back because they've never been included, and so you don't have that intimacy. But with home church, you know each other. You know each other well. And because of that, you're able to have that accountability factor. Anybody want to comment on that? All right. Why not rather be wrong? Okay. Instead, you yourself cheat your brothers and sisters. Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? In context, he's talking about the wrongdoers who are cheating their brothers and sisters. He goes on to say, do not be deceived. Don't let the devil pull one over here. Neither the sexually immoral, the idolaters, nor the adulterers, nor men who have sex with men, that's homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor the drunkards, nor the slanderers, nor the swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. Now pause right there. Don't go on to verse 11. That's the climax. Notice this grand list here. It's not very grand in a good sense, but it's grand in the sense that it's great. Notice this list of what he says here. These folks will not inherit the kingdom of God. And as part of that, the thing that bothers me, I've debated many homosexuals who claim Christianity and the Christian virtues. In fact, I've even debated individuals who were supposed pastors of churches, but they were homosexuals. And I one time had a homosexual who was communicating with me on behalf of, I guess you would call him his husband, and his husband was the pastor. And he was communicating with me, and he was debating these subjects out with regards to this. And one of the things he would say is that you have to understand that homosexuality is not wrong, he would say. It's deviant homosexuality that's wrong. Being unfaithful to your partner, that's the type of homosexuality that's wrong. But I want you to notice in this passage, it doesn't differentiate that. It just says a man having sex with another man, that's all it says. That's bad, that's wrong, that's unnatural. And it can't happen, especially within the church. Then he lists other things, the thieves, the greedy, the drunkards, etc. Slanderers, that's a big one in the church today. That's the folks who are gossiping, and the elders are not calling them on it. These are folks that need to be called out. Then he says, okay, got all that? But then verse 11, and that is what some of you were. You were just like those folks. And the point that he's making in this passage is, don't go back. Don't go celebrating the former life. Why would you take your disputes among brothers back to a place where there is no wisdom? Folks who are made up by this list, don't do it. He says, that's what some of you were, but you were washed. You were sanctified. That means set apart. You were justified. That means just as if you'd never sinned. Justified, just as if I'd never sinned. Justified in the name of the Lord, Master, Jesus, Savior, Christos, which means the Messiah, and by the Spirit of our God. You got the entire Godhead listed here, do you not? You got Jesus, you got the Spirit, and you got the Father. And he says, you were justified in that. He says, look, some of you were those people. Don't go back to that. Don't trust in the world to pass judgments with regards to lawsuits, etc. These folks have no wisdom. Surely, within the church, you can find enough wisdom gathered together that you can solve these particular problems. That's what some of you were, but you were washed. Now, as I end this thing, I ask you this question. How were they washed? One of the reasons I find that it's important for us to stress baptism is because baptism is, and I don't mean to take away the sacred nature of it, but essentially baptism is a spiritual bathtub. It's getting in the tub and letting the Lord wash you off. You're filthy, you're dirty. Years and years of grit and grime have collected to you, and the Savior takes you into the bathtubs and scrubs you off, and when you come out, it's like a new person. Romans 6, verse 4. That's what baptism is. And so I believe that this is a direct reference to the concept of baptism. When he says some of you were that way, but you were washed, I think you could say baptized. Sanctified, that's what the church is. It's set apart. The more the church looks like the world, the more we try to ingratiate ourselves to the community, the less we are sanctified. We're the called out. We're the sanctified. And we're the just as if I'd never sinned because of the blood of Jesus Christ. That all happens because of Jesus, the Spirit, and the Trinity. I'll put together the Jesus, Spirit, God the Father making up the Trinity. Comments, questions, rebuttal on anything I shared with you there. Thank you, all of you who are out there and have contributed to our time together. I love you, I appreciate you. And if you're doing it, join me tomorrow at noon, and we'll deal with some holy hope and humor. Noon. Thank you for tonight. Appreciate it. Sonny Childs saying, be there. Matthew 16:26.